All right. And we're live. So let me just jump straight in. So welcome to Build Your Own Marketing API with Python. I'm using Flask and it'll take roughly 30 minutes, give or take. And we're going to be talking about templates and forms. And just to sort of go over what we're going to be doing. So I will just I will just go over some concepts. Then we're going to have a look at a live demo. And if we have time afterwards, we might look into having a chat or maybe going into Scribble. It really depends. This last part will not be recorded, but part 1 and 2 will be. And yeah, just to briefly introduce myself. So my name is Laura. I'm based in Seoul in Korea, and I would consider myself more of a tech adjacent person as I do marketing for my day job. And the purpose for this meetup is to reverse engineer what I'm using on the daily to have a better understanding, deeper understanding of the tools that I deal with, and hopefully also help you build your own marketing API. Just to briefly introduce what an API is. So it's a virtual middleman transferring data from one interface to another. My source is Turing.com for the definition. And some general examples of APIs are, for example, PayPal, logins, for example. And in the context of marketing APIs, common APIs that you might find are things like Google Ads, Google Analytics. Snapchat has several APIs, for example, publisher APIs, conversion APIs to track the money that you make with your ads, or for example, Facebook also has their own API. Now, just to go over the main concepts. So the first concept I wanted to touch on was templates. And templates are basically HTML files, and they're dynamically rendered. And what that means is you have content and it responds to user input. And the way it does that is it uses Python concepts such as loops, lists, variables, and the like. And the way it does that is it uses something called a Jinja template engine. In my machine, it's called Jinja 2. So apparently there's different versions of it. And I just a little side note, because in Jinja in Korean, like if you stress the syllables a little bit differently, Jinja, it means oh really, like oh, is that right? And I kind of had to look up what the word means. Did it maybe have a certain origin? You know, what's the meaning? And apparently in Japanese it means temple. And apparently the way the people thought of it was, if you take temple, it sounds a little bit similar to template, so we're going to be calling it Jinja. All right. And so the thing with templates is they have to be in a folder, and it has to be on the same level as your app, as your Python app. And it has to be called templates. It cannot be called, I don't know, my template. It cannot be called Laura's templates. It has to be just templates. And we can also use something like a base template, and that can be used for a reusable code. It uses inheritance. I'll show you in a bit how that works. And if you want to style your API, your HTML files, you can do that with a linked, with a linked static style sheet. So just again to go over it. So here you have your project folder. You have your virtual environment. You have one folder which is called static, which is where you can store your CSS files and your images. Then there is a folder which has to be called templates. So apparently Flask looks for a folder called templates, where you can call your base and where you can have your files. And then you have your Python app on the same level. And then if you keep them on the same level, they can access each other. And the next concept I wanted to touch on was forms. And forms are basically used to send or to get data to and from your API. And what I'm currently doing is I'm using a form for somebody to sign in or maybe to sign up, to register. Let's say you have a website and the person who visits your website really wants to sign up maybe for a newsletter or for content That's basically what I'm trying to do at the moment. And you label the forms in your template, and then you can get the associated data from these fields. I'm trying to keep it a little bit simple for this meetup. But for a future meetup, I'm planning on having something like input sanitization. So for example, you have to use certain characters or you cannot use certain characters. I want to have some kind of validation. So for example, sometimes you have to input a password, right? And then the website says, oh, you have to include a capital letter and a special character and a number, that sort of thing. And what I also want to do is I want to find a way to hash my passwords, and I want to store them in a database. So all of these things are something that I will be looking at for a future meetup. Okay, so first of all, let's have a look at the template bit. So up here, where you see the computer, that is your app. You have a little endpoint. In my case, I called it just enter email. There are some methods where you get your data and you post your data. And if, for example, if somebody posts something, if you have somebody who inputs some data, then there will be some data, and you can use the get object from the email and the password field. And you return your template, and you return it as render template, and you return the path of the email. You return the path of the template that you want to display on your page. And if you go into your template file, your Ginger file, you can have something called a form, and they are identified by their IDs. So the ID bits down here, they have to correspond to the get objects up here. And that's how you get your dynamic rendering, where you get user input. And just to, before we get into the demo part, so I just want to cite my sources. There is a Flask web app course on Codecademy, and I was using that just to maybe understand the fundamentals a little bit better. I just wanted to make sure this is not an ad. I'm not paid to host these meetups. I don't get any compensation for mentioning this. Okay, it's not a paid gig to host these meetups. I was also looking at Flask documentation, and I was using FreeCodeCamp. They have a video titled "Creating APIs with Python." I also like that video a lot. However, it is quite different from what I'm doing. For example, they use an API called Fast API, and they're using it to build a social media API. But if you're interested in having APIs with Python, that might be a very interesting video to look at as well. Now, it might be time to get into the demo bit. And let me just bring up my code as well. Just one sec. Let me just check. Is there anything that you want to ask before I share the code? Was there anything that I should maybe explain it in a bit more detail?
I thought that was really clear, thanks. So it's great to move on. Yeah, for me, and that.
I mean, it's not very complex at this point. It's quite simple, I would say. But let me just share my code, and I think that'll make it a bit clearer as well. So, okay, can you see that? Sorry, is that all visible? Yeah.
Yeah, I can see.
Yeah. Let me just maybe zoom in just a little bit. Is that better, or is that worse?
That's good for me. I've got quite bad eyes. Yeah, it's good.
I can zoom in a bit more.
Oh, that's perfect.
Okay. So just to go over, so up here we've got our virtual environment, and so what you can do if you want, it's recommended in a lot of documentation that I've read, is to develop your API in a virtual environment, and you just do that via you activate your scripts basically. And then up here we have our static folder, and the static folder has all the styling. I've got a really basic CSS file up here, and it's really just to sort of style the background and some of the fonts. Really, it's nothing too fancy. And then maybe images. I might add some images at some later point. Then we've got the templates up here. So the templates are basically your web pages. And here's the interesting bit. So if you have code that you would like to have for all your pages. So for example, if you want to have, if you want to have the same sort of header or the same sort of footer for all your pages, or maybe similar styling, what you can do is, so let's say you got all your basic stuff up here. You've got your style sheet and all that good stuff. And then what you can do is you can take your body and you have something here, something like a handlebar where you say block content, and then you end with end block. And everything in between that you have will be the part that'll be different across your web pages. Okay, let me just show you what that looks like. So let's say up here, what you do in your actual web page, you put, okay, extends base.html. So that's your sort of foundation. And then you say block content. Okay, so basically what you have up here, and then you start with the same, you say block content, and then everything else after that will be the part that will be different across each page, and then you end with end block. If you have a look up here, so this is your enter email template, and you have a form, and the action part will be your endpoint. You can say method post, okay? So that's basically where the user inputs some data, and you label it for email, and you give it an ID and the name also for email, and it has to be required. Otherwise, it'll give you an error saying that you have to input your data. And you do the same with the password. You put type and ID for password, and it also has to be required. And then you have a little input button at the bottom. And the way that looks like in your app, just to review. So I'm here are my libraries. There are a lot of bits that I was experimenting with, and it either hasn't quite worked for me, or I'm not quite ready to go into detail with that. But that's definitely something for a future meetup. So what I want to do is I want to find a way to validate the data that is input. And actually, there is a library called Flask WTF, and I think somebody was being a little bit clever with that. Maybe somebody felt a bit edgy calling it like that. But there is something called Flask form, and for some reason it's not working. So again, that is something I'm going to have to look at into more detail. I followed the documentation, but I think something's not working out for me. So what I've just done here, I'm just using basic forms, and I'm they're not specifically Flask forms, but they do work. So now what you do is you have your application instance, and then you can have your endpoints. And in my case, my endpoint is the enter email.html endpoint, and I'm using get and post to get and to post data. And let's say if somebody posts data, then that creates an instance, and you want to get email and password data. And that's how it renders basically. And then at the end, it just says, okay, if you want to run, that's how you run it. And just to maybe show you what the end result looks like, it's very, very basic at this point. Let me just bring it up. Okay. So this is what I have at the moment. It is very simple, but I basically have a little bit of text. I've got my email form, and I've got my password, and yeah, that's basically where I stopped. Oh no, and my comment is showing. That is shocking. One sec. So basically what I was trying to say is that the name attributes correspond to the ID attributes in your app. Let me just delete that. That's a little note for myself. Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's pretty much it at this point. And yeah, like I said, for a future meetup, what I would like to do is to have a form validation and to also store the data that my API receives. Yeah, let me just have a little look. Okay, yeah, that's pretty much it. Anything you want to comment on or ask maybe?
Yeah. Hi, Laura.
Mm.
Yeah, so I'm in the office now.
You made it. And you're alive, which is good.
So
Relax.
I brought your attention to it looks quite similar to, like I said, to Django, and
Mhm.
so I don't know, maybe Grace should go there now. I have like a few comments, possibly
Mhm.
a demo I would also like to show you,
Oh, sorry. Let me just is it okay to stop recording maybe?
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I'll just stop recording and then maybe you can talk freely as well. Okay. 3, 2, 1.